Hi everyone, this is Arcadius and welcome back to Naval Creed. Today we will be going over the stats clash for the Tier 4 matchmaking battleships, but before that it was update day and there are a couple changes that we will be addressing, so let's go over those. First things first, it's not really a change, but it is something that's different from last video. I had remarked that the camo on the turrets for the Hood sister ship were kind of being finicky, and they are now, well, it now looks like it's been resolved. So that's nice to see that they keep up on details like that. And we also have another sister ship for another British battlecruiser. This one being the newest Prism battlecruiser that came out that's being Repulse, or that's Renown. Repulse is the one in the tech tree. But Renown now has a sister ship, and I've renamed her Courageous. I'm not a biggest fan on the colors of the camo, but it's another camo, so I mean, I'm gonna take it. It could definitely be worse, but I mean, I like the white and the gray back here. This is very nice. But I'm not really liking the green with the blue, but I mean, some people might like it. I'm just not one of those. But there we have it. We have a new sister ship that can be purchased for 6,000 coupons. And that's pretty much the only real change. The only other thing that was notable, I would say, is that they kind of reworked the American Destroyer tech tree. So originally it went from Samson to Wix to Farragut to Mahan to Gearing. And then, well, from Mahan to Fletcher to Gearing. And then Clemson, Sims, and Benson were just extra ships that you could purchase and grind, but they weren't required. So they have now switched it to go from Mahan to Benson to Fletcher to Gearing, and I'm assuming they did this because they're getting ready to input those three other American destroyers that were hinted at earlier in the year, that being Porter, Gridley, and Somers. So maybe those will be upcoming in the next couple months or so. It'd be nice to see those. 2021 is running out, so if they wanted any more ships in the game this year, they're running out of updates to be able to do that in. So maybe we'll see some good stuff before the new year, but maybe not. Who knows? Maybe they're just setting it up for next year. Regardless, nothing else has really changed at all. You still have all your ships here. So, with that, we're going to go over the Tier 4 battleships today. And there is a kind of catch, but let's get ready to go over that. Alright, so Tier 4 battleships. We have Kaiser, we have Queen Mary as a battlecruiser, and we also have Ganga, which is the first Russian battleship that we run into. Now, for the most part, for the earlier videos, if you're matchmaking Tier 4, let's say, you would expect to see ships of 3.5 and 4.5 or 4.6 that would also be tossed into games. We see that with cruisers, and we also see that more or less with the destroyers. Well, not really yet, but for a lot of cruisers will have intermediate tiers mixed in with them. However, that does go with battleships, but not at tier 4. As many battleships games as I play with these three battleships, I'm only tossed into tier 4 battleship games. So these ships only see each other and no one else. Obviously, you could probably rig that if you were teamed up with, let's say, a 4.6 battleship. Then you would probably have a higher chance of being tossed into a 5.0 game. But for the most part, these three battleships are only going to see each other in battle and nothing else. At least battleship-wise. So, yeah, the comparisons between these are probably going to be the most accurate out of any of the tier comparisons I have. There's games where I have a 6.5 and a 9.0. There's games where I have an 8.5 and a 10.5. So, really the matchmaking is all over the place some games, and other games it's all exactly the same. It's really hard to predict, and like I said at the beginning of this Naval Stats Clash series, nothing is set in stone. There's obviously going to be ships that come out afterwards. Everything is still subject to change. I mean, they just changed Baltimore and Oregon City not too long ago, and those were ships that are, well, at least Baltimore has been in the game for a long time. So everything's still subject to change, and there might be more ships that come out that impact the stats of these as well. So for the current game, these comparisons are still accurate. All right, so enough talking. We have a pretty respectable German battleship with 12-inch guns. Not the best guns at all. In fact, she's really, really bad with her guns, but they can pack quite a punch if you actually manage to hit something. Her armor is really good, and her secondaries are pretty decent as well. I'll explain why I hesitate to say that. But all in all, she's not a bad ship, but she's not a spectacular ship. But for tier 4, she's pretty powerful. For Queen Mary, she's extremely fast. She has really, really good health, and she has a really good torpedo protection. So she's really survivable. She has really long range guns, but I mean, eh, there's carriers in this tier, and she has pretty much nothing in terms of AA defense and really bad maneuverability. So that's always going to be a drawback there. But she really has really good high explosive shells. And then lastly, we have Ganga, one of the newest battleships in the game. Um, actually just came out this year, and she has a very, very strong broadside of 4 triple guns, along with a bunch of secondaries along the side, and the strongest AA of battleships at this tier as well, surprisingly. And this is one of my favorite battleships at this tier. All right, so let's start by going over the stats, but before that, you should know that each of these has a different playstyle. Kaiser is best at close range, Queen Mary is best at long range, and Ganga is best at medium range, in my opinion. So let's see what we have. So for health, Kaiser actually has the least by about 400, and Queen Mary has the most by quite a bit, actually. Was that about 6,000 HP, a little bit less, 52,300 health. And then she also has a 25% torpedo damage resistance, which is also the highest out of these 3 battleships. So in terms of Queen Mary survivability, she's at the very top at this tier. Even amongst all the carriers, the cruisers, destroyers, it's very hard to find something that can sink this ship in one shot, whether it be torpedoes or bombs or anything like that. In terms of belt armor, though, she's actually middle. Ganglet has the lowest at only 225 millimeters. Kaiser has the most at 250, and it will be very, very hard to Citadel Kaiser, but it's also very hard to Citadel Queen Mary as well. I don't really think I've been able to. Ganga, on the other hand, is quite easy to Citadel if you get a nice broadside. But for the most part, for example, Kaiser and Ganga, they have casemates, so that's a good shell catch there. You just aim for the casemate deck, and you'll get tons of penetration damage. Or for Queen Mary, you just aim for the entire flat broadside. She's a gigantic tower sticking out of the water, so it's not a hard ship to hit, and you're still going to do a ton of damage. Turning circle radius, Kaiser and Ganga are pretty much exactly the same. The only outlier is Queen Mary at 750 meters, but that's because of her length, and her length is because of her speed. So that is pretty respectable. It's a common trait with all British battlecruisers is that they are usually very long and therefore they don't turn very well. Speed-wise, Kaiser and Ganga go 23 knots. Not exactly stellar, but hey, you're not going to win in a race against Ning Hai. You're going to be tied because you both go 23 knots. However, Queen Mary does go quite a bit faster at 30 knots, and she even comes with a speed boost, so she can excel past that for certain periods of time. Surface detectability, Ganga has the worst at 16.2 kilometers, and Kaiser has the best at 14.2 kilometers, and Queen Mary's in the exact middle at 15.2. Air detectability, these maps are really small, so it's not that big of an issue, but there are carriers. So in terms of air detectability, again, Ganga is the worst at 14.1, Queen Mary's in the middle at 11.8, and Kaiser is at the top, I should say, at 10.5. So Kaiser is the stealthiest battleship, while Ganga is the least stealthiest. Which is kind of funny considering Kaiser has this giant tower in the middle, and you would think you'd be able to see that farther, and then Ganga's pretty low to the water in my opinion, but still the worst detectability. Alright, let's see. Going on to the guns. So Kaiser and Ganga have 12-inch guns, and Queen Mary has 343 millimeter guns. So I think that's about 13 and a half or 13.7, something like that. It's not quite 14s and it's not quite 13s either. It's somewhere in the middle. In terms of guns, I would say Gamgut has the best guns. Not only does she have the most of them, she has 12 guns total. Queen Mary only has 8, and then Kaiser on a full broadside has 10. But the way her guns are set up, the best broadside you probably should expect is about an 8-gun broadside. In terms of 180-degree turn time, Kaiser is the absolute worst at it. It takes a full minute for the guns to turn around. And you do see that in game. It's ridiculous how slow these guns are. Queen Mary has about 45-second degree turn time. All of her guns are on the center line, so that is quite important. And then Genguts are also on the center line at 36-second turn time, so quite fast. However, the way the turrets are situated is not the best. You have the I'm going to say turret 1 and turret 3 that face directly forward, and turret 2 and turret 4 that face directly aft. So on either side of the ship you decide to shoot, at least 2 turrets are going to have to turn all the way around each time. In terms of rate of fire, however, Kaiser is the best at 2.3 rounds a minute, which is about 26 seconds, followed by Queen Mary at 2.1 rounds a minute, or 28.5-second reload. Then Gangut has the lowest rate of fire of 1.9 rounds a minute, or 31.5-second reload. Damages, Queen Mary has the most damage per HE shell, 5,700, but Gangut is pretty close at 5,300. Fire percent, again, British battle cruiser thing, you're gonna have a very, very high 5%, and you see that with Queen Mary at 45.2% chance of a fire. Compared to Kaiser of 19.1 and Gangut of 22.1, you have more than double the chance of fire of both of those battleships. In terms of high explosive armor piercing, German battleship trait, Kaiser has the best at 76 millimeters. They might have small guns, but the millimeters of armor that their high explosive shells can go through is quite extensive, no matter what tier you're at. Queen Mary, surprisingly, actually has the least amount of HE piercing. So you have a very good chance of lighting a fire, but not a lot of good chance of actually penetrating the armor. So you might set a fire, but not necessarily do damage. Gangut is somewhere in the middle, about 50 millimeters of HE piercing. Gangut is actually a really, really good HE spammer. And for the first 3 Russian battleships, so Gangut, Imperatriz de Maria, and Ismail, all of them have 12 guns total. And it doesn't matter if you have HE or AP, you're going to do a ton of damage. And that's reflected also at the higher tiers with Rostoslav and Ekaterina with their 16-inch guns. Whether you use high explosive or armor piercing is kind of irrelevant. If you aim for the superstructure with HE, you're going to do a ton of damage. And if you aim for the broadside or the casemate deck with armor piercing, you're going to do even more damage. So this ship is just, it dishes out so much good damage. In terms of armor piercing, Queen Mary has the highest number of per shell of 10,400 damage for a Citadel hit, with Gangut having the middle of 8,600 and Kaiser having 8,400. In terms of velocity, also there's HE velocity. Kaiser has the fastest shells, with Queen Mary actually having the slowest, and that's also shown in AP velocity, with Kaiser having the fastest and Queen Mary having the slowest. And then Gangut's just a little bit faster than Queen Mary, but she also has 4 more guns than Queen Mary, so it kind of equals it out. In terms of number of shells per minute, Kaiser can lob 20 if you give a full 10 gun broadside. There's a very limited arc where you can do that, so most of the time you're only going to get 8 guns on a broadside if you angle correctly, and so you would only have about 16 shells per minute, but the maximum you can do is 20, and that equals out to 3 fires possible according to numbers. Queen Mary can send out 16 shells a minute with her 45.2% fire chance. That equals 7 fires possible in a minute, and you do see that the fire chance is really good. You will set lots of fires. However, your damage with arm or high explosive will be lacking since you don't really have a lot of HE piercing capability. Then Ganga, considering she can only technically launch one round a minute, um, she can only send out about 12 shells, but that also still equals 2 fires. Honestly, though, I see a lot more fires in game. I do have buffs to my reload, so my rate of fire is probably about 2-ish rounds a minute, so I would have about 4 fires, but I still see a lot more, honestly. She's a really good HE spammer. In terms of high explosive alpha, Kaiser and Queen Mary are pretty much identical, and then Gangut's about 20,000 damage more at 63,600. And then similar story with Kaiser and Queen Mary for the armor piercing alpha, they're pretty much exactly the same. And Genga is again about 20, well, actually exactly 20,000 in terms of Queen Mary, 20,000 damage more. So Genga can lob a lot of shells downrange and they can do a lot of damage. All right, that brings us to gun range. So Kaiser has the lowest gun range of 14.6 kilometers. Queen Mary has the farthest of 16.8 kilometers, and Ganga has the middle ground of 15.5 kilometers. So you can see how Kaiser does have to get pretty close in order to actually hit something. In terms of accuracy, it's ridiculous how bad Kaiser's accuracy is. You can shoot at a target that's like 6 kilometers away, and you might get 1 or 2 hits. It's sometimes really abysmal. However, in terms of Queen Mary, she does have the best range. She also has the fastest speed. She might not have the best maneuverability, but she can pretty much dictate how she plays the game. You can stay out of range of enemy ships, and you can lob high explosive and just burn them from range. Yes, you may not have the maneuverability, but if you're at range, that gives you all the more time to react to incoming shells. So she's just played best at range, and yeah, your armor is perfectly suited for that. You might have plunging fire and HE damage on you, but in terms of armor piercing, you can, if you angle enough, you'll just bounce all of it. And then Gangut's, like I said, in the middle of 15.5. Not that much of a difference though, but both Kaiser and Genka are slower than Queen Mary, and that is a very important thing to remember. In terms of secondaries, all 3 ships have secondaries, some better than others, but for the most part, Kaiser and Genga have decent secondaries, and that's reflected in the ranges at 4.5 and 4.4 kilometers respectively, and then there's Queen Mary with 4.0. We'll go over the secondaries in more detail later. Next, we have anti-aircraft defense. So Kaiser has 26 anti-aircraft guns, and she used to be, I guess you could call the queen of AA at this tier. It was always surprising that Kaiser had a pretty decent amount of anti-aircraft defense, because it's not really something you see on German battleships, at least at higher tiers. They do get eclipsed quite quickly. However, she does have the 26 AA guns that go out to the farthest range of any battleship of 5 kilometers and do a total damage of 69 DPS. Queen Mary, pretty much absolutely nothing. There's not really any battle cruiser except Vanguard that really sticks out to me as being good with anti-aircraft defense. Even Renown is iffy, though she's still pretty decent, I would say. Queen Mary, you have 2 AA guns that do 12 DPS at 4 kilometers. Nothing special at all. You're not going to shoot down anything. And then Ganga, the newest addition to Tier 4 battleships, actually has even more AA defense than Kaiser, and you will shoot down quite a few planes too. You don't have the range that Kaiser has. As you can see, Kaiser has 23 DPS at 5 kilometers. Ganga doesn't get anywhere close to that until about 2.5. Because at 4 kilometers she only has 18, and then the closer you get, all the way up to about 1.5, you get 36 DPS. Total, however, she does have 76 DPS altogether. So on paper, she has better damages, but in ranges compared to damages, Kaiser is better, at least with the long range AA. Yeah, torpedoes, bombers, and dive bombers are going to be a very big threat to battleships at this tier. Yes, you have only a couple squadrons to deal with per carrier, and they're very slow, but you don't have much to shoot them down with. So having a battleship that can actually do something about it is quite nice at this tier. So Kaiser and Ganga are definitely good in terms of AA defense. Next, we come back to the secondaries we were mentioning. So Kaiser has a casemate deck of 150 millimeter guns or 5.9 inch. You have 7 to a side, so 14 total, and these shoot armor piercing. Now, these are good against battleships and cruisers, at least tall cruisers, I should say. If they're low to the water cruisers, it's not always the best, and destroyers are pretty much out of the question. As mentioned earlier on previous videos, German secondaries tend to focus on the superstructure, so anything that's really close to the water, such as destroyers, it tends just to go right over them. At higher tiers, starting at about tier 6, that becomes less of a problem since the ships become a lot taller themselves and you are actually able to start doing decent damage. Um, but for now, German battleships against destroyers it's a nightmare. It's absolutely terrible. You also have two twin 88 millimeter guns on each side, so that's a total of four twin secondaries. These fire high explosive. These probably are also what give you the good long range AA numbers for Kaiser. In terms of secondaries, however, your armor piercing shells are very unique. There's not many battleships in the game that can use armor piercing secondaries. You have Germans, which can only use armor piercing all the way up to Bayern at 5.5, and then it just switches to all high explosive. And then the Japanese can actually use armor piercing all the way up till top tier 10, mainly on their 155 millimeter guns, though. Everything else is high explosive. The French used to have really good armor piercing, but then they switched it to high explosive. But honestly, the French were really good with their armor piercing secondaries. It was awesome. So use your armor piercing secondaries as much as you can because those honestly do a lot of damage. They can citadel cruisers, and even against battleships, you'll get about 3,000 to 4,000 damage. And they fire relatively quickly. Your accuracy is meh, but if you're at 4.5 kilometers, then there's not really that much room for error. For Queen Mary, she has 16 4-inch guns arranged in, I guess you could say, two groups. The front part of the ship has 8 of the guns, and then the second part of the ship, the aft superstructure, has 8 more guns, or the final 8. However, you can only use 8 per side, and they fire high explosive. Nothing spectacular, and if you're within anything uh, of 4 kilometers with Queen Mary, you have done something terribly wrong because you don't have the maneuverability for anything that close. Ganga, she has 8 secondaries to his side as well. These are casemates. They're also, well, there's 16 total. There's 8 to his side. These are 120 millimeter guns or about 4.7s. These also fire high explosive. I did start setting all the Russian battleships as secondary builds when they first came out because they had so many secondaries. With limited success, I don't have the actual module applied. I don't actually think you can do that anyways at these low tiers. But I do have the crew skill. It does kind of work out. You can get out to about 5 kilometers or so. And against destroyers, these are actually pretty decent. Queen Mary and Kanga don't have the same kind of secondary setup that Kaiser has, where it aims for the superstructure. It just aims for the hull. So against battleships, you're not going to do anything with your secondaries at all. But against destroyers and to a limited effect, carriers and cruisers, might be a little bit better. So your Kaiser secondaries are better suited for brawling with battleships, and Queen Mary, you really shouldn't be using them at all. But if anything, they'd be good against destroyers for a little bit of damage. And then Ganga is pretty much made to take on destroyers with their secondaries. It's pretty decent. And then lastly, we have our consumables to go over. So each ship has a damage control party. Queen Mary's last the shortest of only 20 seconds. Kaiser's and Ganguts last 25 seconds. Each has a cooldown of 80 seconds with unlimited charges. Each ship has a heal. Again, Queen Mary has the shortest heal duration of 25 seconds, while Kaiser and Ganga have 30 seconds. 80-second cooldown. Kaiser and Ganga have 4 charges, and Queen Mary only has 3. However, Queen Mary has well, I guess you can call it a battle cruiser super heal. You may only have 3 charges and they don't last as long, but you can, on paper, it looks like you can actually heal more than each Kaiser and Ganga in comparison to heal versus heal. So altogether, it does work out pretty equally. And then Queen Mary has a speed boost that lasts 90 seconds. It takes a minute to cool down, and you have 4 charges. And you get, like mentioned earlier, an increase in your speed for a short amount of time, in about a minute and a half. But honestly, if you're already one of the fastest ships at this tier, it doesn't really matter. I think you can get up to about 33 knots or so, is what I would assume. It's usually 1 or 2 knots you can increase your ship speed. And with that, that concludes all of the stats for the Tier 4 battleships. There's no torpedo chart because they don't have any torpedoes, but as we've gone over the destroyers and the cruisers, you find that it's actually really hard for any of those ships to be able to torpedo these ships and sink them in one shot, especially Queen Mary. She has a ton of health, and there's only maybe 1 or 2 ships that can actually sink her with full torpedoes. You kind of just have to whittle her away with armor piercing, but that's not really hard considering she's absolutely massive. Kaiser is best sunk with torpedoes and just aiming for the casemate gun deck. She'll soak up a lot of armor piercing shells that way. And then Ganga, you just aim for the waterline and you can citadel her pretty easily. However, with her lack of superstructure, high explosive will probably just shatter all the time. It'll hit the turrets and not really do anything. All in all, my favorite battleship at this tier is going to be Ganga, but it really depends on the situation. If you're looking for a brawler battleship that can deal with battleships and more or less be effective against carriers, you're going to want to go with Kaiser. If you want long range, set everything on fire kind of gameplay, you're going to want Queen Mary. And if you want a kind of jack of all trades where you kind of want to brawl, but you also want to set everything on fire, or also just slap everything with armor piercing and do over 100,000 alpha AP damage, you want to go with Ganga. Each of these 3 battleships are really powerful in their own ways, and I wouldn't say one is necessarily bad. They're just not really comparable to each other. They all have different playstyles. So with that, I will wrap up today's video. If you liked the video, make sure you like and subscribe. Since there's no further ships, the next video we'll be going over are Tier 4 carriers, the first carriers we will be seeing. They will have slightly different ways we will be comparing them, and I still have to figure out how that will be. So we'll figure that out before the next video, but I will see you next week, and hopefully we'll have some more good information in the next update, maybe even those American Destroyer previews, who knows. But again, thank you for watching, and take care.